On Mother's Day, my son dragged me out of my own front porch with a suitcase I hadn't even packed. He didn't hug me, didn't say Happy Mother's Day. He just shoved a set of papers in my hand and told me my gift was a room in a nursing home. My neighbors stood across the street with their coffee mugs, watching like it was some kind of show. Derek smiled at them as if he was doing me a favor. That smile cut deeper than any insult. In that single moment, I realized I wasn't his mother anymore. I was baggage, a burden he wanted to dump where no one could see me. The air smelled of salt from the ocean, but all I could taste was humiliation. I had baked muffins that morning, set the table with the old blue plates, thinking he might sit and share breakfast like we used to. Instead, he slammed the car door, tossed my bag in the trunk, and announced for everyone to hear that I was finally going someplace better. I wanted to scream, but the words stuck in my throat. He drove me in silence, the radio playing too loud, drowning out my thoughts. I glanced at his profile, the same jawline as his father, the same eyes I once thought held kindness. Now they looked sharp, focused only on the road and the promise of money that came with my absence. The more miles we put between us and my home, the more it felt like I was being erased. The nursing home loomed like a prison, beige walls, windows too small to let in real light. Derek strutted in as if he owned the place, waving to the receptionist. He introduced me like a package being delivered. My stomach knotted when I saw the room. A single bed, thin sheets, the smell of disinfectant masking something rotten underneath. My name already taped to the door. He had planned this long before Mother's Day. He patted my shoulder, loud enough for others to hear, saying he had done the responsible thing. His voice was syrupy sweet for strangers, but when he leaned close, his whisper was cold steel. Stay here quietly, and don't make this harder. I sat on the bed, the thin mattress dipping under my weight, staring at the small dresser where my life was supposed to fit. I had lived 68 years, raised him through storms and loss, and this was my reward. A room that looked like the waiting area for death. When Derek left, I walked to the window. The glass was cloudy, and outside I could see a parking lot with cracks in the asphalt. That was my view now. I pressed my hand to the pane, and for a moment thought about the house by the shore, the garden my husband and I built, the mornings filled with seagulls and the scent of fresh coffee. Those memories made my chest ache. But the ache sharpened into something else. Anger. Betrayal. A fire I hadn't felt in years flickered inside me. Derek thought he had silenced me, boxed me up in this place, but he had underestimated the woman who raised him. He forgot that I knew how to endure. He forgot that I still had a voice. I want you, listening to me now, to feel the weight of that betrayal. Maybe you have felt invisible too. Maybe someone you love has been treated like they no longer matter. This story isn't just mine. It is for every mother, every grandmother who gave her life to her family only to be cast aside. That day, while the halls echoed with nurses' shoes and the faint cries of other forgotten souls, I promised myself one thing. Derek would regret the smile he wore when he shoved me through those doors. He would learn that a mother pushed down is still capable of standing taller than he ever imagined. I didn't know yet how I would fight back, but I knew the war had already started. And Mother's Day, the day meant to honor me, would go down as the day he made his greatest mistake. The next morning, Derek showed up again, holding a clipboard like he was my warden. His voice was louder than necessary, sharp enough to draw the attention of the staff passing in the hallway. He told the nurse at the desk that everything was already arranged, that the house had been sold, and that I had no need to worry about bills anymore. The way he said it, you would think he was proud of himself, as if dumping his mother into a facility was some kind of noble act. I froze when the nurse handed me a packet of papers. On top was a photocopy of the deed to my house, stamped as sold. My eyes ran across the black ink, and there it was, my name scrawled beside his. Except it wasn't my writing. I knew every loop of my own signature, and this was a clumsy imitation. My hand trembled so hard the paper rattled. Derek leaned close, his whisper sliding into my ear. No point in reading it. It's done. The house isn't yours anymore. The words hit me harder than the shove through the doors yesterday. My home, the place where I raised him, where I buried his father's ashes under the oak tree, was gone. My throat burned, but Derek didn't stop. He turned to the nurse with that slick smile. She has nothing to worry about. We'll handle everything. Just make sure she settles in here. I wanted to shout, to rip the papers in half, but my body refused to move. I sat stiff on the edge of the narrow bed, gripping the documents, staring at the shaky forgery. Derek straightened his tie and tossed the clipboard onto the dresser like a final insult. I'll be back in a few days to check on you. Try not to cause trouble. When he left, the silence pressed down heavy. My stomach churned as I folded the packet, sliding it under the thin mattress. I could still hear his footsteps fading down the hall, his confidence echoing with each stride. He thought I was beaten. He thought I was too weak to fight. But inside, the anger was starting to claw against my ribs. Later that afternoon, a nurse's aide came in to check my vitals. She was young, her eyes tired but kind. She glanced at the papers sticking out from beneath the mattress and gave me a questioning look without speaking. I held her gaze, and something passed between us. She knew. She had probably seen others abandoned here by their families, stripped of everything. She pressed my arm gently and whispered low enough for no one else to hear. "You're not crazy. I believe you." Then she slipped out of the room before I could respond. That tiny sliver of validation sparked a flicker of strength. I wasn't completely alone. Someone had noticed. But the rage kept burning hotter. Memories collided in my head. I saw Derek as a boy, sitting at the kitchen table, his feet too short to touch the floor, eating the pancakes I made before my long shifts at the library. I remembered staying up late sewing his Halloween costumes, walking miles so he could have the car for school dances, selling my jewelry when tuition bills came. Every sacrifice replayed against the image of him standing tall, declaring that my home was his now. Night fell, and I lay awake listening to the sounds of the facility. Doors shutting, patients moaning, carts rattling. It was a chorus of forgotten lives. My mind refused to rest. I turned over the forged papers again, running my fingers across the ink. He had sold the house out from under me, bragging as though it made him a hero. And worse, he had done it in public. He had reduced me to nothing more than an obstacle in his pursuit of comfort. I thought of the neighbours watching on Mother's Day, their eyes flicking between pity and disbelief as Derek paraded me like an unwanted pet. I imagined the gossip travelling through town already, painting me as helpless, irrelevant. That humiliation dug deeper than the loss of brick and mortar. He had stolen my dignity. By dawn, I was pacing the small room, the band of rage around my chest tightening with every step. My reflection in the bathroom mirror startled me. My eyes were no longer soft. They were hard, sharp, unfamiliar. I touched the glass and whispered to myself, "No more." When Derek returned that afternoon, his arrogance filled the doorway before his body did. He smirked when he saw me standing rather than sitting. "Hope you're adjusting," he said with false cheer. I cut him off, my voice firm. "What have you done with the oak tree?" His smile faltered for a second before returning. "Don't worry about the tree. The new owners will probably cut it down." His words sliced through me. That tree held my husband's ashes, our history, our life. The hallway grew quiet. A few staff lingered nearby, pretending not to listen. Derek's mask cracked under their eyes. He leaned in close, lowering his voice. If you cause problems, if you breathe a word of this to anyone, I'll make sure you never leave this place. That was the moment I knew he feared me, even if he wouldn't admit it. His threat wasn't power, it was desperation. He could sell the house, but he couldn't erase me. Not yet. And the more he pushed, the more I felt the ground shift beneath him. I let him leave again without another word. But inside, a storm had already formed. I wasn't just betrayed, I was armed with the truth. And soon, everyone would see Derek for who he really was. I lay on the stiff mattress that night, with the forged deed clenched in my hand, listening to the hollow sounds of the nursing home. A woman down the hall cried out for someone who never came. Wheels squeaked on linoleum as an aide pushed a cart past my door. Each noise reminded me I had been dropped into a place where people were forgotten, where family names were spoken less and less until they disappeared. Derek had chosen this place deliberately. He wanted me erased. But as I stared at the ceiling, I felt something shift inside me. The shock had burned away. What remained was anger so sharp it cut through the fog of despair. By dawn, when the weak sunlight pushed through the cloudy window, my decision was set. I would not allow Derek to silence me. That afternoon he returned, striding into the room like a man checking an investment. He leaned against the dresser, arms folded, watching me with a smirk that dared me to defy him. I stood at the window, forcing myself to hold his gaze. "So, how are you adjusting?" he said, his tone sweet enough for the nurse outside to hear. I lifted the packet of papers from the mattress and held them up. "This signature is not mine." His smile froze for half a second before twisting into amusement. He took a step closer and plucked the papers from my hand, crumpling them casually. "No one will believe you," he murmured low. "You are old, tired, and already tucked away. Everyone thinks I am the dutiful son who finally made the tough choice." His words struck me like blows, but I did not flinch. The nurse's aide from before passed by the door, her eyes darting to me, then to Derek. I caught the flicker of recognition there, the silent witness to his cruelty. I forced my voice to stay calm. "You think you've won, but you underestimate me." He barked a laugh, sharp and ugly. "You have no house, no money, no power. What exactly do you think you can do?" I let the silence stretch, watching him squirm. He expected tears, pleas, submission. Instead, he found a wall of fury. The moment cracked, and for the first time, I saw a flash of uncertainty in his eyes. When he left, I sat on the edge of the bed and pressed my palms together to steady them. Memories surged. Derek at 10 years old, his backpack too heavy, me walking beside him in the rain so he would not feel alone. Derek at 18, standing with his diploma, my pride spilling over as I clapped until my hands stung. All the love I had poured into him came back now as fuel for something different. If he thought age had dulled me, he was about to learn how wrong he was. That night, the storm inside me broke. I rose, pacing the room, whispering to myself that I would not die here. I would not vanish into the long halls of forgotten mothers. I replayed his words, his threats, the way he smiled for strangers while spitting venom at me in private. He had built his scheme on the assumption I was powerless. That assumption would be his downfall. The next morning I waited by the payphone near the nurse's station, timing my move when the hall cleared. The young aide noticed, hesitated, then slid a scrap of paper with a number written on it into my hand. "Call her. She's a reporter. Trust me." Back in my room, I dialed with shaking fingers. When the voice answered, warm and steady, I felt a rush of relief. It was Helen, an old friend from the library days who now worked for the local paper. I told her everything in a clipped, urgent voice: the forged signature, the sudden sale of the house, the way Derek had staged my removal as a generous act. She listened without interrupting, then said she would come by, pretending to visit a relative. "Bring what you have. We will not let this disappear." When I hung up, my chest heaved with something between terror and exhilaration. For the first time since Derek forced me through those doors, I felt control slipping back into my hands. Later that day, Derek returned again, this time with his wife. She carried herself with smug superiority, glancing around the room like inspecting a piece of property. Derek spoke loudly, making sure staff nearby could hear. "We just wanted to check that Mother is settling in. We know this is the best place for her." His wife chimed in, her voice dripping with disdain. "She looks comfortable enough, and really it is better this way. We have our own lives." My nails dug into my palms, but I smiled thinly. "Yes, I can see you have your own lives." The air between us tightened. Derek shot me a warning look, the kind that used to silence me when he was a teenager full of rage. But I was no longer afraid of that look. When they left, I pulled the packet of papers back from under the mattress, smoothing out the creases Derek had crushed into them. My eyes scanned the shaky signature, the fraudulent attempt to mimic me. I whispered into the quiet room. "You made a mistake. You forgot who taught you to read." That night, the halls were restless. Someone cried out down the corridor, and I sat awake, the papers spread across my lap. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with the clarity of resolve. Derek thought he had buried me alive in this place, but what he had really done was free me from the illusion that silence kept the family whole. I would fight. Not for the house, not even for the oak tree with my husband's ashes beneath it, but for every mother who had been treated like she was disposable once her usefulness ended. By morning, my plan was set. Derek's arrogance had given me the opening I needed. He thought he had stripped me of every weapon, but he had left me one: my voice. And I was ready to use it. I woke before the sun, my body stiff from the thin mattress, but my mind sharper than it had been in years. The forged deed lay flat across my lap, the evidence of Derek's betrayal staring me down. My anger had cooled into something harder, something precise. Last night I had made a vow to myself, but this morning I was ready to act on it. The hall outside my door was quiet. Nurses whispered, residents shuffled, but beneath it all I could feel the pulse of my decision pounding steady. I pulled my old leather purse from under the bed and reached deep into the lining. My fingers brushed against something I had almost forgotten: a folded piece of paper, worn soft with age. It was a page from my husband's journal, one he had left me after his heart attack years ago. The words were shaky but firm. "Protect the house. Do not let anyone take what we built." That single sentence was all the fuel I needed. Derek had not only stolen from me, he had desecrated the last promise between me and the man I buried. By mid-morning, I made my move. I slipped into the hallway when the staff rotated shifts and walked to the common area where the payphone stood. My hand shook slightly as I dialed the number Helen had given me. When her voice came through, calm and steady, it was like the ground leveled beneath me. I told her about the forged papers, about Derek's act of parading me here like discarded furniture. She listened without a word, and when I finished, she said, "Bring what you have. I'll meet you this evening." The plan formed quickly in my mind, but it also meant I had to keep Derek from realizing I was no longer broken. That afternoon, he arrived again, carrying a plastic bag of store-bought cookies, as if the gesture made him a doting son. His wife followed, glancing around the room with open disgust. Derek placed the bag on the dresser, then gave me a pointed look. "I hope you're adjusting. This place is safe. We have done what is best." I turned the words over slowly, steadying my breath. I met his eyes, my tone calm but sharp. I saw the deed. My name was forged. His smile slipped, and for the first time his wife's eyes flickered. Derek barked a laugh and shook his head. "You must be confused. Old documents can look strange." He turned to the aide nearby, performing for the audience. "She has been under stress. Sometimes she misreads things." I stepped forward, refusing to shrink. "I know my own writing. That is not my signature." The aide froze in place, caught between duty and sympathy. Derek's mask cracked. His voice dropped low, venom dripping. "Stop this. You will embarrass yourself." I held his gaze, my jaw set. "You already did that for me." His wife tugged his arm, muttering for him to leave, but Derek leaned closer, his words sharp as knives. "If you keep pushing, I will make sure no one hears you." He turned and strode out, slamming the door behind him. The silence that followed rang loud in my ears. My pulse thudded, but I did not tremble. He had shown fear. His threats were proof that my resistance mattered. As the evening stretched, Helen arrived, disguised as a visitor with flowers. She sat across from me in the lounge, pretending to be an old friend. I slid the crumpled packet of papers into her tote. Her eyes skimmed the shaky signature. Then she looked up, fire in her expression. "This is not legal. He will not walk away from this." Hearing her words was like a blade cutting through the fog. For the first time, I felt the shape of justice forming. But beneath the relief, fury roared louder. Derek had stolen my home, humiliated me before neighbors, threatened to bury me alive in this facility. Tonight, the tide turned. Later, alone in my room, I replayed his smirk, his casual dismissal of my life. I pressed the page from my husband's journal to my chest and whispered a promise. He will pay. Not in whispers, not in secrets, but in front of everyone. My body was tired, but my mind raced. I envisioned Derek at the town hall, laughing among his friends, playing the role of a respectable man. I pictured myself standing there, holding the truth like a weapon, tearing the mask from his face. The thought made my blood surge. The humiliation he forced on me would be returned with interest. I sat at the window until midnight, the glow of the parking lot lights staining the glass. My reflection stared back at me, older, lined, but not broken, stronger. Tomorrow would not crawl like today. Tomorrow would be the first step toward ripping Derek's scheme apart, piece by piece, until nothing remained but his shame. The next morning, the air in the nursing home felt heavier, almost electric. Word had begun to move quietly between the staff that something was wrong with the papers Derek had pushed through. Helen had already taken copies, and she had promised me action. But I knew waiting in silence would give Derek the advantage again. I was finished with silence. By midday, the article appeared online. The headline was sharp and merciless. Local man accused of forcing elderly mother into nursing home to sell family home. The piece had every detail: the forged signature, the sudden sale, the spectacle he had made on Mother's Day. My name was in black and white, and so was his. It spread across the town faster than a storm front. When Derek stormed into my room that afternoon, I knew he had seen it. His face was tight, the confident smirk stripped away. He slammed the door behind him, and his voice snapped like a whip. "What have you done?" I didn't move from the chair by the window. I let his fury fill the room before I answered. I told the truth. That is all. He paced the floor, pulling at his hair, muttering curses under his breath. You think this makes you look noble? You think anyone will believe a bitter old woman? His words were knives, but they bounced off me now. I leaned forward, my voice steady. They already believe it. They are reading it right now. He stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing into something darker. You have no idea what you have started. I can bury you here. I can make sure no one listens again. I stood slowly, every bone in my body screaming, but my spirit stronger than it had been in years. You underestimated me, Derek. You thought I would stay quiet. That was your mistake. The silence that followed was thick, broken only when the young aide from before appeared in the doorway, her eyes wide. Derek turned on her, barking for her to leave, but she stood her ground. I saw the fear in her face, but also defiance. She had read the article too. That night, Helen called the facility, her voice cutting through the static of the old phone. She said the paper was already preparing a follow-up story, this time with direct quotes from staff who had witnessed Derek's behavior. She asked if I was ready to go public in person. I didn't hesitate. Yes. The next day, the nursing home lounge was crowded with residents, staff, and townspeople. Helen had arranged it like a community meeting, but everyone knew what it really was. I sat at the front, my hands folded tight, the forged deed on the table beside me. Derek burst in halfway through, his wife trailing behind, her face pale with panic. He raised his voice immediately, drowning out the quiet murmurs. This is all lies. She is confused. She doesn't know what she is talking about. I stood, my body trembling but my voice clear. My son sold my house using a false signature. He locked me away in here to silence me. He smiled at my neighbors as he shoved me through those doors. That is the son I raised. Gasps rippled through the room. Derek's face flushed red. He lunged forward, his finger jabbing at me. Stop talking, right now. Helen stood quickly, holding up a small recorder. Everyone here deserves to hear what you said when you thought no one was listening. She pressed play, and Derek's voice filled the room. Cold, detached. When she dies, we sell it all. We take the money and move on. The room erupted. Some shouted in disbelief, others muttered curses. Derek's wife shrank back, tears spilling as the mask slipped from his face. He tried to grab the recorder, but two staff members stepped between us. His voice cracked, desperate now. That recording is nothing. She twisted my words. But the damage was done. He had been exposed not just as greedy, but as cruel, willing to mock his own mother's death as profit. I turned to him, my voice shaking but louder than I thought possible. You wanted the world to see me as weak. Today, they see you. He froze, staring at me, chest heaving. For the first time, I saw fear. Real fear. His control was slipping through his fingers, and he knew it. Helen closed her notebook with finality. This story is only beginning, and the truth will not go away. The crowd broke into whispers, cameras from local stations flashing, staff murmuring to one another. Derek stood alone, the weight of his downfall pressing into his shoulders. I sat back down, my pulse racing. The humiliation he had handed me on Mother's Day had been thrown back at him, doubled, magnified, and branded into his reputation forever. I looked at the forged papers, then at Derek's face, pale and twisted in rage. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to satisfaction. He wanted me invisible. Instead, I had become the mirror that showed him what he really was. The community meeting had left Derek rattled, but he was far from finished. I could see it in his eyes when the crowd broke apart, when people whispered and pointed at him. He would not go quietly. Pride and greed had been his armor for too long, and stripping it away only made him more dangerous. That evening he returned to the nursing home. His footsteps thundered down the hall before he even reached my door. The young aide who had quietly supported me tried to stop him, but he shoved past her, storming into my room like a man possessed. His voice filled the space, sharp and venomous. "You think you humiliated me. You think that pathetic article and a cheap recording will ruin me." I sat in the chair by the window, spine straight, waiting. He expected fear. Instead, he found my calm stare. "You ruined yourself, Derek. Every word was yours." He laughed bitterly, running a hand through his hair, pacing the floor like a caged animal. "You are old and bitter. No one will remember your words. They will remember me, the son who took responsibility." He turned suddenly, pointing a trembling finger at me. "I gave you comfort. I gave you care. And this is how you repay me." I rose slowly, leaning on the armrest but steady. "You gave me chains. You paraded me like trash in front of the neighbors. That was your gift." His face twisted, fury breaking through the thin layer of control he had left. He grabbed the chair I had been sitting in and slammed it against the wall. The sound echoed through the hallway, drawing startled gasps from passing staff. His wife appeared in the doorway, pale and desperate, begging him to stop, but he ignored her. His eyes locked on me, wild and burning. "You think you can shame me," he shouted, stepping closer, his fists clenched. "You are nothing without me." I felt my heart pounding, but I stood tall. The fear that had once silenced me was gone. I met his rage with steel in my voice. "I am nothing because of you. I am everything in spite of you." The words struck him harder than any slap. He faltered, his body shaking, his mask crumbling. Then, in a surge of blind anger, he lunged forward. The young aide rushed in, calling for help, but Derek's hand closed around my arm, shoving me back against the dresser. Pain shot through my shoulder, but I did not cry out. I locked eyes with him, forcing him to see the reflection of his own violence. Staff poured into the room. 2 men pulled him away, but he thrashed, shouting curses, spitting his fury at me as if every word could erase the truth already burning through the town. His wife collapsed against the doorframe, sobbing, unable to defend him any longer. The head nurse, stern and unshaken, ordered Derek out. He fought them until security arrived, dragging him down the hall as his voice echoed behind him. "She is lying. She is destroying me. She is my mother, and she is destroying me." I sank back into the chair, my breath heavy, my body aching from the shove. But inside I felt an unexpected surge of triumph. He had shown himself. Not just greedy, not just cunning, but violent. And he had done it in front of witnesses. The community meeting had cracked his mask. Tonight it shattered completely. Later, the aide sat beside me, her hands trembling as she poured me water. Her eyes were wide with both fear and awe. "They saw it," she whispered. "Everyone saw it." I nodded, clutching the glass, my knuckles white. This was no longer a private war. Derek's downfall had become a public spectacle, and there was no turning back. Alone again, I stared at the forged papers on the dresser, at the journal page from my husband folded neatly beside them. My body hurt, my shoulder throbbed, but my resolve had never been stronger. Derek had tried to bury me, but in doing so, he had buried himself. I leaned back, breathing slowly, letting the pain settle into determination. The battle was no longer about the house, the deed, or even the oak tree in the yard. It was about something deeper: dignity. The right to be seen, to be valued, to not be erased by the very blood you brought into the world. I whispered into the quiet room, my voice steady and unshaken. You wanted a war, Derek. Now you have one. The attack in my room had left a bruise on my shoulder, and a sharper bruise on Derek's reputation. Word spread quickly inside the facility and beyond. Staff whispered, residents watched, and the small town began to buzz with outrage. What had started as whispers was now a firestorm, and Derek was standing in the middle of it. But instead of retreating, he decided to push harder, to confront me in the most public way possible. 2 days later, the nursing home held its monthly community gathering in the main hall. Families came to see their relatives, local officials often stopped by, and the press had begun circling because of the story Helen broke. Helen herself was there, notebook in hand. I knew Derek would not be able to resist showing up. He thrived on performance, even when his mask was cracking. When he entered the hall, the air shifted. His voice carried across the room before he reached me. There she is, my mother, the woman trying to ruin her own son. He spread his arms wide, playing to the audience. You all know me. I have cared for her. I have sacrificed. And this is what I get in return. The crowd stirred uneasily. Some shook their heads, others watched me, waiting. I stayed seated until he was close enough, then rose, gripping the edge of the table for balance but holding my chin high. Derek, you sold my house with a forged signature. You forced me into this place like luggage you wanted stored out of sight. His jaw tightened, but he tried to keep the performance alive. That is not true. She is confused, manipulated by reporters who only want a scandal. Helen stood from her chair. We have witnesses. We have documents. And we have your own words. She gestured toward the staff in the back of the room, several of whom had come forward since the last incident. Derek's mask slipped again. His eyes narrowed, his smile gone. He turned back to me, voice low but loud enough for all to hear. You are ungrateful. You are destroying this family. I stepped closer, my voice cutting across his. There is no family when a son treats his mother as a burden to be hidden. You chose money over blood. Gasps spread through the room. Derek's wife, standing by the wall, lowered her head, unable to meet anyone's eyes. He spun on her, shouting for her to defend him. She stammered, her voice breaking, and in that moment the last thread of his control unraveled. He lashed out at the staff, accusing them of lying, then turned on Helen, calling her a parasite. The hall descended into chaos, but I refused to let my voice be drowned out. I shouted over the noise, my body trembling but my words steady. When you dragged me through these doors on Mother's Day, you thought you erased me. But look around. Everyone sees you now. The crowd erupted. Some clapped, others shouted in agreement. Derek's face twisted, red with fury, sweat streaking down his temples. He lunged toward me, but security was already moving. They intercepted him before he reached me, holding him back as he screamed. She is my mother. She owes me everything. I stared at him, my voice quiet but carrying. I owe you nothing but the truth. His body sagged as security dragged him back, his protests echoing through the hall. The performance had collapsed, the mask shattered in front of the people he once fooled. When the hall finally settled, Helen placed her hand on my arm. You did it, she whispered. But I knew this was only one battle in the war. Derek would not surrender easily. He had tasted power, and he would claw for it, even as it slipped through his fingers. That night, alone in my room, I replayed the scene. His voice, shrill and desperate, his wife's silence, the gasps of the crowd. I felt the ache in my shoulder, but beneath the pain was something sharper. Satisfaction. For the first time in years, I had spoken without fear, and people had listened. Yet I also knew Derek's rage had reached a new level. His pride was wounded beyond repair, and wounded men were dangerous. The war was not over. It was only about to climb higher. The morning after the community hall erupted, the facility buzzed with the kind of tension that hummed beneath the skin. Residents whispered, staff moved with hurried steps, and I could feel the storm building. Derek had been dragged out the day before, but I knew he would not stay away. His pride had been gutted in public, and a man like him would only answer humiliation with rage. By early afternoon, the prediction came true. I heard his voice echo down the corridor before he appeared. He was louder than ever, insisting he had the right to see me, pushing past the nurses who tried to block his way. When he burst through the door of the lounge where I sat, his face was twisted, a mask of fury and desperation. He pointed straight at me, his voice trembling with venom. "You think this is over? You think you can make a fool of me?" I stood, my body aching but my voice steady. "I didn't make a fool of you. You did that yourself." His fists clenched at his sides, his whole body shaking. Around us, residents froze, staff held their breath, no one daring to move. His wife trailed behind him, her mascara streaked, eyes wide with shame and terror. She whispered his name like a plea, but he shook her off. Derek stormed closer, jabbing his finger toward my chest. "I gave you everything. I gave you food, shelter, care, and you repay me with betrayal." I let his words hang, then struck back with the truth that cut sharper than any accusation. "You gave me nothing but chains. You stole my home, you mocked my life, and you tried to bury me alive in this place." Gasps rippled through the room. Derek's rage tipped over into madness. He lunged forward, gripping my arm so hard I felt the bruise bloom instantly. His voice cracked into a shout. "I should have done this sooner. I should have silenced you before you turned everyone against me." Before anyone could stop him, he shoved me backward. My body collided with the edge of the staircase that led down to the recreation room. For a heartbeat, the world tilted, and then I felt myself falling. Pain exploded as I struck the steps, my arm twisting under me, my breath ripped from my chest. Screams filled the air. Staff rushed forward, residents cried out, and the young aide who had always watched me ran to my side. She shouted for someone to call security, her hands shaking as she tried to lift me. My vision blurred, but through the haze I saw Derek, frozen at the top of the stairs, his chest heaving. He had finally gone too far, and the horror on his wife's face said she knew it too. Then came the sound that sealed everything. The security guard replaying the hallway camera feed, the sharp image of Derek's hands shoving me. The footage spread instantly through phones and screens, captured by staff who had been recording the chaos. His act was no longer whispers or accusations. It was undeniable truth, burned into pixels, replayed again and again. Lying on the floor, my arm throbbing and my body aching, I still felt something rise in me. Triumph. He had unmasked himself completely. The son who claimed to protect his mother was now branded as the man who tried to destroy her. Security seized him, dragging him back as he shouted frantically. "She tripped. It was an accident. She is lying to ruin me." His words echoed hollow, drowned out by the evidence flashing across screens. Residents pointed, staff whispered with fury, and his wife collapsed into a chair, sobbing uncontrollably. As they lifted me onto a stretcher, I caught Derek's eye. One last time. His face was drained of the smug confidence he had carried for years. In its place was panic, the look of a man watching his entire life collapse. I whispered through the pain, just loud enough for him to hear. "You wanted me silent. Now the whole world hears me." The sirens wailed as they carried me to the hospital wing, but the sound in my ears was sweeter than pain. It was the sound of justice closing in. Derek had crossed the line, and there was no turning back. The fall had hurt, but it was his fall that mattered more. His pride, his greed, his violence, all exposed in front of the very people he had tried to impress. That night, as I lay in a hospital bed, my arm bound tight, I stared at the ceiling and let the weight of it settle. The battle had nearly cost me my body, but it had delivered the blow that shattered him. Derek's war was over. The war for dignity, for truth, for the right to be seen had only just begun, and for the first time in years, I knew I would not lose. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic, the walls too white, too quiet. My arm throbbed in its sling, but the pain was a steady reminder of what Derek had done and how far he had fallen. I knew the town was already talking. The video of him shoving me down those stairs had been replayed on phones, on the evening news, even shared online by people I had never met. His voice, his rage, his violence were out in the open for the world to see. That evening, Helen appeared at my bedside, her notebook in hand. She leaned close, her words clipped with urgency. "It is everywhere. He cannot run from this. Reporters want statements. The police are preparing charges. This has gone far beyond whispers in a community hall." I nodded, my chest heavy, but my eyes steady. He wanted me erased. Instead, he erased himself. The door swung open, and Derek's wife slipped inside. Her makeup was smeared, her body shaking. She looked at me as though she was seeing me for the first time. I tried to speak, but her words tumbled out first. "He is losing everything, his job, his friends. Even his brother will not take his calls." She clutched her handbag like it was the only thing holding her together. I never thought he would go this far. I studied her face, the guilt swimming in her eyes. "You stood beside him," I said, my voice calm but edged with steel. "You watched him put me here. You let him humiliate me." Tears streaked her cheeks, and she dropped into the chair by my bed. "I was wrong. I was weak. I thought he was right, that you were better off here. I never imagined he would try to hurt you." Her words were salt in an open wound, but they were also truth. Derek had not acted alone. His cruelty had been enabled by silence, by those who looked away. Still, as I stared at her trembling hands, I felt something shift inside me. She was no longer an accomplice. She was another casualty of his greed. Later that night, the police arrived. 2 officers stood by the door, firm and unflinching, while Derek was led in handcuffs through the corridor. His face was pale, his jaw clenched, his eyes darting between the cameras that flashed and the neighbors who whispered. He tried to speak, but the officers kept moving him forward. His wife rose to her feet, covering her face as sobs tore out of her. I sat up straighter in bed, ignoring the ache in my body. For the first time, Derek's eyes met mine without the shield of arrogance. What I saw there was not power. It was desperation. He wanted to shout, to spin another lie, but every word he might have used had already been stripped away by the truth the cameras had captured. The officers paused long enough for the reporters to fire questions. Derek's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His silence was louder than any excuse. As they led him away, Helen leaned close to me. "The town will never forget this. He is finished." But I knew it was not just about him being finished. It was about every person who had been silenced, every parent shoved aside, every elder treated as a burden instead of a life lived. Derek had become the face of that cruelty, and now his downfall carried the weight of something larger. The following morning, the headlines were brutal. Local man arrested for elder abuse. Video shows violent attack on mother. Each article painted him not as a son, but as a predator, a warning to others who thought their parents could be discarded. My picture sat beside his on the front page, me in a sling, him in handcuffs. The contrast said everything. Neighbours came by the hospital, some with flowers, others with apologies. I heard them murmur about how they had believed Derek's story at first, how convincing he had been. One older man gripped my hand tight and said, "We see you now. We will not look away again." Lying back against the pillows, I closed my eyes and let the words sink in. For weeks, Derek had tried to erase me, strip me of dignity, silence me. But here I was, alive, heard, and stronger than he ever imagined. His downfall had not only freed me, it had opened eyes across the community. That night, as the lights dimmed and the halls quieted, I let myself breathe. The war was not over. There would be trials, testimonies, legal battles. But the tide had already turned. Derek was no longer the man who controlled the narrative. He was the man in the orange jumpsuit. His violence burned into permanent memory. I whispered into the dark, not for him, but for myself. You thought you ended me, but I am the one who ended you. The courthouse was packed. Reporters lined the back wall, neighbours filled the benches, and the air carried the kind of tension that made every breath feel heavy. I walked slowly down the aisle with my arm still bound in its sling, but I held my head high. Each step echoed with the weight of months of humiliation and the sudden shift of power. Derek was already seated at the defendant's table, his suit wrinkled, his eyes dark with sleeplessness. He looked smaller than he ever had before, stripped of the arrogance that once cloaked him like armor. The judge entered, and silence fell. The proceedings began quickly. Derek's lawyer tried to open with words about family loyalty, about misunderstandings, about an ungrateful parent twisting the truth. But the room bristled with disbelief. People had seen the video, had heard the recording. His lawyer's words were brittle against the hard facts. When the time came, Helen stood and read aloud the evidence collected. The forged deed, the financial papers, the testimony from staff who had witnessed Derek's rage. Every word struck like a hammer. Derek shifted in his seat, sweat gleaming on his forehead, his jaw tightening with each new revelation. Then came the video. It played on a screen at the front of the courtroom, the sound of his voice filling the room. Everyone watched as Derek's hands shoved me down the stairs, his fury plain, his words dripping venom. The gasps that filled the courtroom hit harder than any gavel. The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowed, and Derek's shoulders slumped as though the weight of his actions had finally crushed him. I was called to speak. The clerk swore me in, and I stood before the room, my heart steady but my hands trembling slightly. I looked at the judge, then at the people gathered, and finally at Derek. My voice did not waver. On Mother's Day, my son dragged me from my home. He forged my name, sold my house, and locked me in a place he thought would silence me. He called it care. It was betrayal. I gave him my life, and in return he tried to erase me. The room was silent, every eye on me. I continued. This is not just about me. This is about every mother, every father who has been treated as a burden. We are not burdens. We are not disposable. Derek wanted the world to believe I was nothing. But today, the world sees the truth. I turned my eyes on him. Derek stared back, his mouth tight, his eyes glassy. For the first time, he could not look away. I let the silence stretch, my words settling into the walls of the courtroom. The prosecutor rose, building on my statement with precision. Derek was not a man overwhelmed by responsibility. He was calculated, manipulative, and dangerous. He had stolen, he had lied, and when exposed, he turned to violence. The case was no longer about paperwork or property. It was about abuse, about the dignity of the vulnerable, about the truth of who he really was. Derek's lawyer tried to salvage him with character witnesses, but each attempt crumbled under cross-examination. Former co-workers admitted he had always been temperamental. Neighbors whispered about how he flaunted money that was not his. His wife, pale and broken, gave testimony that ended it all. Her voice cracked as she admitted she had stood by while he forced me into the nursing home. She wept as she confessed she had been complicit, but that she never imagined he would try to hurt me. The courtroom shifted, every eye on Derek, as his wife's tears confirmed what the world already knew. By the time closing arguments began, the outcome was sealed. Derek sat slumped, his tie loose, his hands gripping the table as if it could keep him from sinking. His lawyer mumbled through a weak plea for leniency, but the room was unmoved. The judge's words rang like steel. The evidence is clear. The defendant is guilty of elder abuse, forgery, and assault. The sentence will reflect not only the crimes, but the cruelty with which they were carried out. The gavel struck, and the courtroom erupted in whispers. Reporters scribbled furiously, neighbors shook their heads, and Derek's wife collapsed into sobs. Derek himself froze, his mouth slightly open, his face pale. He looked at me one last time, eyes wide with something between hatred and despair. I did not flinch. I held his gaze, steady, until the bailiff placed a hand on his shoulder and led him away in cuffs. Walking out of the courthouse, the sunlight hit my face, warm and sharp. For months I had lived under the weight of betrayal, humiliation, and fear. Today I had watched that weight shift onto the shoulders of the man who had put it there. Derek's downfall was complete, not because I had destroyed him, but because he had destroyed himself. As the crowd dispersed, I stood on the steps, breathing deeply, letting the noise fade. The war for my dignity had been fought in public, and the victory was not just mine. It belonged to every person who had been silenced, every elder who had been treated as less than human. Derek was gone, but the truth remained, bright and unshakable. The courthouse emptied, but the noise of the verdict still echoed in my mind. Guilty. The word had carried the weight of every bruise, every humiliation. Every night I lay awake wondering how my own son could betray me. Yet even as the judge's gavel faded, I knew there was one final confrontation waiting. It was not in front of cameras or a crowded room. It had to be face to face, stripped of audience and performance. 2 days later, the police arranged a short meeting. I was led into the visitation room, the walls grey, the air heavy with the faint smell of disinfectant and sweat. The glass partition separated us, a phone receiver dangling at each side. Derek sat there, already in his orange uniform, his hands cuffed. He looked older than he had in weeks, his shoulders slumped, his eyes hollow. For the first time, I saw my son without the armor of arrogance. He lifted the receiver slowly, his voice cracked and raw. "You destroyed me." I pressed the receiver to my ear, my grip steady. "No, Derek, you destroyed yourself." His jaw clenched, and his eyes darted down to the table. I wanted the house. I wanted the money. I was tired of working and scraping while everyone else seemed to move ahead. His voice rose, sharper now. I thought I deserved more. I thought after everything I was owed. I let him finish before I spoke. "You were owed nothing but the truth. And the truth is that love is not a transaction. You had a mother who gave you everything she had. You decided that was not enough. He slammed his fist against the table, rattling the chains at his wrists. You think you're so righteous. You never saw me. You never noticed how much I hated feeling small. Everyone else had more, and I was stuck with scraps. My chest tightened, but I kept my voice firm. I noticed. I noticed every time you lied, every time you let bitterness swallow you whole. I noticed the boy who once held my hand, and the man who chose to let greed replace love. His eyes filled, but anger pushed through. I am in here because you wanted to humiliate me. You wanted revenge. I leaned forward, my face close to the glass. I wanted justice. You humiliated yourself when you dragged me through those doors. You betrayed yourself when you signed my name. You condemned yourself when you shoved me down those stairs. For a moment, silence pressed between us. His lips trembled, his eyes darting back and forth like a cornered animal. Then his voice broke into something almost childlike. I didn't think you would fight back. The words pierced deeper than any insult. I saw the truth in them. He had believed I was weak, that age had stripped me of will. He had mistaken endurance for surrender. I spoke quietly, my voice laced with steel. You thought wrong. He lowered his head, his shoulders shaking. His voice dropped to a whisper. What happens to me now? I let the silence linger, then answered. That is not my choice. That is the consequence of your own. The guard signaled time, but I kept my eyes on him as I set the receiver down. Derek raised his head, tears streaking his face, his mouth open as if to speak again. But no words came. The chains rattled as the guard led him away, and for the first time in my life, I did not follow him with my eyes. Walking out of the facility, the air outside felt sharp, almost cleansing. I knew the trial had been the public ending, but this was the private one. Derek had looked into my eyes and seen himself stripped bare. Not a son, not a caretaker, not a man in control, just a human being broken by his own greed. The pain in my shoulder throbbed as I walked, but beneath it was something steadier, stronger. The story was not just about his collapse. It was about reclaiming my own voice, about standing even when he tried to bury me. As the car pulled away, I closed my eyes and let the final truth settle. The fight was ending. What remained was the path toward healing, the space where forgiveness and justice would meet. And in that space, I would decide how the story of my life would continue, free of his shadow. The days after the sentencing passed quietly, almost unnervingly so. The town, once alive with gossip and flashing headlines, began to settle. Neighbors who once whispered with suspicion now greeted me with warmth. The same people who had looked away when Derek paraded me into the nursing home now came with flowers, with meals, with apologies that felt clumsy but sincere. I accepted them, not because I needed their pity, but because I knew the truth had been seen, and that mattered more than any apology. The nursing home released me not long after. Helen drove me back to a small apartment she had helped me secure. It was modest, clean, with sunlight pouring through wide windows. It was not the house Derek had stolen, but it was mine, chosen on my terms. When I set my bag down on the table, I felt something loosen in my chest. It was not defeat. It was freedom. Healing did not come in one moment. My arm ached every morning, a physical reminder of the fall. Nights carried shadows of Derek's rage, the memory of his hand on my arm, his voice breaking into violence. But with each day, the weight lessened. I began walking in the mornings, slowly at first, then longer, breathing in the air without fear of being watched or silenced. Letters started arriving, some from strangers who had read about the case, others from people in nearby towns. Older women wrote about their own sons or daughters, about the fear of being discarded, the loneliness of feeling invisible. Some thanked me for standing, for speaking when they could not. I read each letter, tears sometimes clouding the words, and I realized this was bigger than Derek. This was about all of us, about every parent fighting to be seen as human rather than a burden. One afternoon, Helen visited with papers in hand. She told me the authorities were setting up a local outreach program for elder protection, born out of my case. She asked if I wanted to speak at the opening. At first, I hesitated. I had already exposed so much of myself, my pain, my family's betrayal. But then I thought of the letters, of the faces of residents at the nursing home who had watched me stand in that hall. I agreed. The day of the event, I stood before a modest crowd at the community centre. My arm was healing, my voice steady. I told them what had happened, not as gossip, but as truth. I spoke of silence, of how quickly dignity can be stolen when people look away. I spoke of courage, of the strength to speak even when your own family turns against you. And I told them something else, something I had learned through pain, that justice is not only punishment. Justice is remembering who you are when others try to erase you. Afterward, as people lined up to shake my hand, I felt no triumph, no gloating, only peace. Derek was gone from my life, his choices now bound by bars and time. His wife had moved away, leaving with what little dignity she could salvage. I did not hate her, though her silence had wounded me almost as deeply as his cruelty. Hate was too heavy to carry any longer. In the quiet of my apartment that evening, I sat by the window, the journal page from my husband folded neatly on the table beside me. "Protect the house," he had written. I had lost the house, but I had protected something larger. I had protected myself, my dignity, my truth. When I thought of Derek, I no longer saw only the man who betrayed me. I saw the broken boy who believed power would fill the emptiness inside him. He had chosen greed over love, cruelty over compassion, and it had destroyed him. I could not forgive the acts, but I could release the hatred. Carrying it would only chain me to him forever. The path ahead was not perfect. There would always be shadows, moments when I would remember the sting of humiliation, the ache of betrayal. But now those memories no longer ruled me. They were part of my story, yes, but not the whole story. The rest was mine to write, in freedom, in dignity, in peace. Justice had been served. Forgiveness, in its quiet form, had followed. And for the first time in years, I felt whole. If you've stayed with me until the end of this story, I want to thank you. What happened to me may sound dramatic, but for many families, elder neglect and abuse are real, painful truths. Have you ever witnessed someone older being mistreated or silenced? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters, and by speaking out, we can make sure stories like mine are not just tales of survival, but reminders that justice and dignity belong to us all.